One of my most favorited characters in Thomas & Friends history has and always will be Diesel 10. His presence in the series brought along something that many other characters just don't have. He was a genuine threat. Regardless of what you think of him in CGI, despite me actually really liking him, it's still really nice to see that he's kept around in things such as merchandise form. But a big problem that has come along with merchandise form is that he doesn't really have the best of representation. Many people will point out the fact that the face isn't always accurate or the proportions and coloring is off, but the most common complaint that people have is the fact that Pinchy doesn't have the right movements or lack of movements. And whenever there is a representation of Pinchy that is really spot on, it usually ends up resulting in a very fragile product. I'm looking at you, Bandai Tech Diesel 10! But when it came to strange Diesel 10s, the one that always caught my attention the most was the Brio Diesel 10. Brio Diesel 10 has always been one of my favorite pieces of Diesel 10 merchandise out there. I think the proportions of him were really quite nice, the face was amazing, but it did have one glaring problem. That Pinchy was fucking awful. And the crazy thing is, the prototype Diesel 10, as shown here, looks honestly super cool. Like, I think if they went with this one, though it probably would have been more expensive, it would have probably went down as one of the more interesting and cooler Diesel 10 claws to ever be made. So I went on to eBay to find a Brio Diesel 10, and I found this one that didn't have Pinchy, so I bought it just for the sake of it gave me an opportunity to do the two things that I want the most out of a Diesel 10 claw. I want it to be both sturdy but also look good. So that's what I did here today. I'm Troublesome Junction, and this is how I made Pinchy. So after my Brio Diesel 10 came, I realized that he had this absolute massive fucking valley where Pinchy should be. So when I was test fitting a lot of things and doing a lot of thinking, I had to figure out if I wanted to scratch build a claw like how I did with my Bandai Tech Diesel 10, or if I wanted to use a pre-existing thing. And then when I stumbled across the Trackmaster 2 Rebecca, I realized the fact that it has an actual working Pinchy claw, just there, and barely anyone talks about that. Honestly, the pack should have sold better for this alone. So I had the pack already, and I'd been planning to use it for my Nakayoshi Diesel 10, but I decided to use it on the Brio one since I have the Bandai Tech one to lean back on. When I was lining everything up to test fit and whatnot, it feels like it was a match made in heaven because it looked nice and it fit really well. As for making Pinchy's arm, I decided to base it off of my Bandai Tech design, but I needed it to be made of a thicker, more durable plastic, so I went in favor of using coat hangers. Here's a very rough sketch that I made of the design of the actual articulation point. I based it off of dovetail joints, which were very reminiscent of the Jazzwares Sonic articulation, but I needed it to be made of a thicker plastic so it didn't feel as fragile as my Bandai Tech one. And after I did a lot of careful Dremel work, drilling, and cutting, here's the result, and I'm actually really quite happy with it. As for the little metal part that actually holds the joint together, it's made using a tack, and then for the articulation point on Pinchy itself, it's just I drilled a hole in the actual thing so then I could just stick it in there and call it a day. This also allows me to rotate Pinchy because I couldn't do that on my Bandai Tech one. And before I started primering it, I cut out these two little washer type pieces to prevent the claw arm itself from sliding around inside the pivot point itself for being so big. After the paint was done drying, I cut out a thin metal dowel that sat at about 7/8 of an inch to hold the whole apparatus together. And what do you know? It looks and functions amazingly. The whole structure is quite sturdy and it holds together really nicely. The articulation points, it can pivot, it can bend at the arm, and swivel at the head, and of course Pinchy can open and close. And then when you put the claw at rest, it looks really nice, though it doesn't fill in all of the gap space. For something to just blend in with my Thomas Wooden Railway items, I'm really quite a fan of how this turned out. Now initially here, I considered adding on a bunch of the hydraulic detail that's on this actual basis, but I decided not to because one, it would ruin the simplicity that Wooden Railway has, and two, that's just a lot of fragile detail that would easily snap off. And here is the finished product. Now, yes, the paint I used to paint his arm was too light, but it was paint that I just had lying around because I can't really go to the hardware store seeing as the position that we are in, but I'm still really happy with how he had turned out. I think everything that I was looking for was answered in this. An accurate Diesel 10 representation with a very nice and sturdy articulated Pinchy. I couldn't be happier with how this custom turned out, and he's honestly one of my favorites. Originally, I had planned to make this video with my Bandai Tech Diesel 10, but I ended up scrapping that video, so I'm glad that I got the second chance to do this. Now, eventually, I am basically going to do the exact same thing with my Nakayoshi Diesel 10 for videos and stuff like that, but right now, I'm content with this guy, and I love him to bits. So that's all, everyone. Happy holidays, and I'll see you guys on the flip side.